Ecclesiasticus chapter 17, verse 25. Return unto the Lord and forsake thy sins. Make thy prayer before his face and offend less. All right. Shalom. First off, I want to give all praises to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Kakadash. I want to give double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone, the rule well, teach well, and salutations to the hopeful elect that's out there preaching this truth in all honesty and sincerity across the four corners of the earth. Shalom. This is Brother Yaramala. All right, coming at you with a quick video through the spirit, power, and mercy of Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. Lord willing to be edifying. So I want to go into, we got to try to offend as less as possible. All right, notice could say, offenses will come. All right, there's gonna be times, a brother might say something a certain way that you might get offended by, certain things gonna happen in this truth. All right, but we're not weak men. But at the same time, you want to try to offend as less as possible, or, ask brothers forgiveness if you ever offended them. All right. Also, it made me think of the scripture. Let not the sun go down on your wrath. All right. That speaks on, if you're angry at someone or a brother, all right, don't hold that in. All right. That's how grudges and things be formed. All right. In certain ways you feel about a brother will fester. All right. But at the same time, a lot of times if you feel offended and it's petty and it's very small, don't hold on to that, man. All right. But, bros may say certain things, because sometimes as being this truth, you can become hard and austere. All right. And you can lack that not empathy, but you'll lack you'll call things out how you see it or how you hear it. All right. And, you might come off offensive, but we got to be aware of that and be able to communicate effectively. All right. And that's by us, pushing this word first and foremost by us breaking down these scriptures and abiding by the complete doctrine is teaching us how to communicate. All right. That's why, we got to read, to study, to show ourselves approve. Our blessed is he that read, and we got to study to show ourselves approved. All right. Because, through that, you're working on, not only your speech, you're working on a lot of things in this truth. All right. You learning how to orate and all these different things. All right. So a lot of things that come in this truth. All right. We can't be like a docile nigga. All right. That consume brain rot things 24/7. All right. But so let's continue. I don't want to keep on being long winded. But this is Ecclesiasticus chapter 19, verse 16. It says, there is one that slippeth in his speech, but not from his heart. And who is he that have not offended with his tongue? So we all have offended with our tongue, certain things we say, all right, that we don't even know that we offend a brother. All right. And we all, there is one that slippeth in his speech, but not from his heart. So sometimes we can slip in our speech, and whether in this truth, we might have a slip of the tongue. All right. Or, if you just, speaking, you might slip on your words or stumble on your words. All right. But we know in our heart, we know what we're trying to say. All right. But it says, and who is he that have not offended with this tongue? All right. So sometimes you might, well, even, you don't mean it a certain way, but it may come out like, dang, that was harsh to say, or, blunt to say. All right. But it's like, dang, because we all, make mistakes. All right. But we got to try not to offend one another. All right. Things happen, you may take offense to certain things. All right. But we understand that, hey, sometimes you slip in your speech, but not in your heart. You know, you might not mean to say things how it come out, but at the end of the day, you know, we can't be offended by these offenses, especially if they very small and minute. All right, you may think of, you know, where it says, you know, I think Paul said, you know, maybe rude in speech, but not in knowledge. All right, so say somebody like hear you preach, all right, or teach this word, and you know, you might throw a cuss word or something out there. You're like, oh man, you know, I can't hear this guy, you know, but you may be rude in speech, but hey, you teaching 100% truth. Or the same as, you know, you just speaking how you feel towards a brother, but it might rub them the wrong way and it come out offensive. All right, that's all we gotta be mindful of what we say. All right. So let me get Ecclesiasticus chapter 31, verse 30. It says, drunkenness increaseth the rage of a fool till he offend. It diminisheth strength and maketh wounds. All right. So you know, sometimes, you know, when you drunk, all right, can increase the rage of a fool till he offends. So you know how some people get drunk and belligerent, you know, they start, you know, getting in that spirit of trying to fight and cause discourse and contention. All right, you know, it can cause you to offend someone, even, you know, when you drunk, even though they say when a drunk mind speaks sober thoughts. All right, but hey, they still don't make it right, you know. So it diminishes your strength and make wounds. So you can be in a moment of being weak, all right, basically in the mind, all right, and it can you know, make a wound, you know, cause you, you know, to you know, lose certain friendships and relationships with certain people, whatever the case may be. All right, you know, we've seen things like that happen in this walk, all right, where it will render, you know, bros to separate themselves and certain things, all right, or, you know, things, you know, just get to a point where it get out of hand. All right. You know, some brothers can't handle their liquor. All right. You know, some people get violent. All right. You know, want to fight in certain things. You know, things happen. All right. But offenses come in as truth. All right. But hey, man, you know, hey, it be minute, but hey, we gotta think how we speak with brothers, you know, bros. Some brothers be having speech impediments, you know, certain things, stumble with their words. And somebody or a brother might think of it like, dang, you know, the brother, you know, can't get his words out on certain things. But it's just something that their brother just deal with from time to time. All right. You know, just like Moses, you know, he had a speech impediment, but that didn't, you know, make him less of a man, or, you know, or didn't, you know, make him to be looked at a certain way or to be spoke to a certain way. That's just, you know, how, you know, his mind, you know, operated in a way of speech. All right, because, you know, a lot of times before you speak, your mind try to process and form what to say, you know, but sometimes you can't, you know, get the right words out and certain things, especially in the heat of the moment. All right, but it is a lot of things that we all can work on. All right, but we got to try not to offend one another. All right, have patience and be long suffering towards one another. All right, so, hey, Lord willing, is edifying and exhorting, and hope I was able to bring out understanding, all right, on this video. And with that being said, Shalom.